I have $47 million in liquid assets, 3 houses, a car collection that sits in a climate-controlled garage, and I haven't had a real conversation in 11 years. That's not an exaggeration. That's just the number I counted on the way home from my last board meeting when I realized I couldn't name a single person who would miss me if I didn't show up tomorrow. I was 42 years old, I had enough money to live 2 completely separate lives, and I was the loneliest person I knew. Before we continue, remember that this is still a small channel, and I could really use your support. Please like the video and subscribe. It's free, and it helps more than you know. My name is Owen Shepherd, and for 20 years I built something that everyone around me called a legacy. I started with a single warehouse in a rundown industrial park outside of Nashville, Tennessee, leasing space to small suppliers who couldn't afford the big logistics firms. I worked 16-hour days, lived on gas station coffee and sandwiches I ate over a sink, and I didn't notice the loneliness because I was too tired to feel it. By the time I was 35, Shepherd Logistics had become the backbone of distribution networks across 5 states. By 40, I had people who managed the people who managed my people. I had assistants for my assistants. I had a private jet on standby, a penthouse in downtown Nashville with floor-to-ceiling windows, and a calendar so full that I could go weeks without eating a meal that didn't have a business purpose attached to it. The problem was that I had become so good at building things that I had forgotten how to be a person. The penthouse was beautiful. It was also empty. The private jet was efficient. It was also silent. The employees who smiled at me in meetings didn't know my middle name. They didn't know that I had a sister who hadn't spoken to me in 8 years because I had missed her wedding for a merger. They didn't know that I had once loved a woman named Margaret, who told me 6 months before she left that I treated her like an employee with better benefits. I didn't fight her when she left. I didn't even argue. I just signed the divorce papers in a hotel lobby in between conference calls and wondered why I didn't feel more. That was the moment I should have stopped, but I didn't. I kept building, kept expanding, kept adding zeros to my net worth because that was the only thing I understood how to do. It was a Friday night in November when I finally broke. I was standing in the penthouse, looking down at the city lights through the glass, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time someone had touched me. Not physically. I meant touched me at a kind of touch that says, I see you, I'm here, you matter. I'd been running a company that moved millions of dollars worth of goods across the country every week, and I couldn't remember the last time I had felt like I was moving anywhere at all. I called my assistant, a woman named Diane, who had worked for me for 9 years and who I knew almost nothing about, and I told her I needed a break. She asked how long. I said 6 months. She asked where I was going. I said I didn't know yet. She asked if I was okay. I said yes, which was a lie. I chose a small town in rural Oregon, a place called Silverton that I had seen in a magazine once, tucked into the foothills of the Cascades, with a main street that had a hardware store, a diner, and a library that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. I rented a house on the edge of town under the name Owen Shepherd, no second H, just Shepherd, because I thought it sounded like someone who belonged there. The house was 100 years old, maybe more, with peeling yellow paint on the front porch and a wood stove in the living room. It had a kitchen with a gas stove and a refrigerator that hummed loudly at night. It had a bedroom with a window that looked out onto a field of tall grass that swayed in the wind like it was breathing. It had no security system, no intercom, no car in the driveway, except the old pickup truck I bought for $2,000 from a man named Earl, who ran a body shop on the edge of town. I had been in the house for exactly 3 hours when I realized I didn't know how to do anything. I didn't know how to start the wood stove. I didn't know how to fix the leaking faucet in the bathroom. I didn't know how to cook anything that didn't come in a box. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the stove, and felt completely useless. The first month was a series of small humiliations. I burned toast. I flooded the kitchen trying to fix the faucet. I locked myself out of the house twice and had to walk to the hardware store to buy a new lock, only to discover I didn't know how to install it. I spent hours in the grocery store, walking the aisles with a calculator on my phone, adding up the cost of everything, because I had given myself a monthly budget of $3,000, which I thought was reasonable until I realized that people who lived on $3,000 a month knew how to make it stretch, and I didn't. I bought expensive pasta and expensive cheese and expensive olive oil because that was what I knew how to buy, and then I burned the pasta and wasted the cheese. I began to understand, slowly, that I had spent my entire life removing problems from my existence, and I had removed the ones that made me feel alive. The first person who really saw me was a woman named Lena. She lived next door, a widow in her 60s, with silver hair and a garden that took up most of her backyard. She knocked on my door 2 weeks after I arrived, carrying a casserole dish wrapped in aluminum foil, and introduced herself as the neighborhood welcome wagon. She was direct, she asked questions, and she didn't seem impressed or suspicious about anything. She just wanted to know what I thought of the grocery store and whether I'd tried the diner yet. I said I hadn't. She said I should. She said I looked like I needed a good meal. I met Maggie at the diner 3 days later. She was a waitress in her early 30s, which I only knew because she had a birthday pin on her apron, with brown hair pulled back in a clip and a smile that seemed like it had been waiting for something. She brought me coffee and asked me if I was passing through. I said I was staying for a while. She asked what I did, and I said I did consulting, which was vague enough to be true and also completely false. She nodded like that was a normal answer and didn't push. She told me about the diner, about the regulars who came in every morning for the special, about the cook named Frank, who had been there for 25 years and still didn't know how to make an omelette that didn't break. She told me about her daughter, a 6-year-old named Ella, and showed me a picture on her phone. I asked about the girl's father, and Maggie said he was gone. Not dead, just gone, which was a thing that happened sometimes, and she didn't talk about it. I didn't push. For the first time in years, I didn't need to know more. I just needed to listen. I started going to the diner every day. I started walking through town, past the hardware store and the library, past the old church on the hill and the park where kids played on rusty swings. I started to notice things, the way the light hit the mountains in the morning, the way the town smelled like pine and rain after a storm, the way people nodded to each other on the street like they were all part of something I didn't quite understand. I became a regular at the diner, sitting at the counter, drinking coffee, waiting for Maggie's shift. I told her about my sister, the one who hadn't spoken to me in 8 years, and she told me about her mother, who had died 2 years ago and left her a house she couldn't afford. I told her about my divorce, and she told me about the father of her daughter, who had been an accountant with a gambling problem she didn't know about until the bills stopped being paid. We didn't solve each other's problems. We just listened, and that was enough. The man at the hardware store, a guy named Carl, taught me how to fix the faucet. He showed me which wrench to use and how to wrap the tape around the threads. He said it was easy. Everyone needed to know how to do it, and he didn't seem to think it was strange that a 42-year-old man with 3 houses and a private jet didn't know how to do it. I fixed the faucet, and I felt a satisfaction I hadn't felt since I closed my first deal 20 years ago. The old widow, Lena, kept bringing me food, and I started helping her in the garden, pulling weeds and hauling bags of soil. I learned the names of the vegetables she grew, the tomatoes and peppers and the squash that she said was her favorite. I learned how to read the weather by the color of the sky. I learned that the simplest things, the ones I had outsourced to other people for decades, were the ones that connected me to anything at all. Maggie and I started walking together in the evenings. We would take the trail that ran along the river, past the old mill that had been converted into a bookstore, past the bridge where the teenagers hung out and smoked cigarettes they thought no one knew about. Ella came with us sometimes, running ahead, pointing at ducks and dogs and the flowers that grew along the bank. She asked me if I had ever seen a moose. I said I hadn't. She said she had seen one once and it was bigger than her dad's truck, which was the only way she knew to measure things. She also asked me why I was sad, and I said I wasn't sure. She said that was okay. Grown-ups didn't have to know everything. It was the most honest conversation I had had in years. I fell in love with Maggie, and I told her, and she said she loved me too, but she said it carefully, the way people say it when they've been hurt before and they're not sure they can survive it again. I said I understood. I said I would be careful with her. I said I would be careful with Ella. I believed it. I was lying. The lie was the thing I couldn't escape. Every time Maggie told me about her day, every time I sat with Carl at the hardware store, every time Lena brought me soup and told me I was looking better, I felt the weight of who I actually was pressing down on me. I wasn't Owen Shepherd, the consultant from nowhere. I was Owen Shepherd, the logistics tycoon with a net worth in the tens of millions, the man who had missed his sister's wedding for a merger, the man who had treated his wife like an employee. The lie was eating me from the inside. I wanted to tell the truth, but I was terrified. I was terrified that if they knew who I really was, they would see the money and stop seeing me. I was terrified that Maggie would think I had been playing with her, that the time we had spent together was just a rich man's vacation from reality. I was terrified that Carl would stop teaching me how to fix things because he would think it was beneath him. I was terrified that Lena would stop bringing me soup because she would think I didn't need it. I knew it was irrational. I knew I had already proven, 6 months of proving, that they saw me for who I was. But the fear was louder than the logic. I wasn't planning to tell her. I was planning to let the whole thing fester until I couldn't stand it anymore, and maybe I would just vanish, go back to my old life, pretend the whole experiment had never happened. But the truth didn't wait. It never does. It was a Saturday afternoon in March, and I was at the diner sitting at the counter when the news came on the small TV that hung in the corner. A segment about a major logistics acquisition, the kind that moved millions, the kind that took months to negotiate and days to announce. My face appeared on the screen. Owen Shepherd, founder and CEO. The acquisition was being finalized, the anchor said. The founder had been absent from public appearances for nearly 6 months, but sources said he remained deeply involved behind the scenes. I stared at the screen. I stared at my own face, looking back at me. I felt everything slow down. I felt the coffee in my hand go cold. I felt the entire weight of the room shift as people started looking at me, looking at the screen, looking back at me, putting it together. Frank the cook stopped moving. Carl, who was sitting at a table a few feet away, looked from the screen to me and back again. Maggie was standing behind the counter, wiping a mug with a rag. Her hand stopped moving too. I looked at her and saw the confusion in her face, and then the realization, and then the silence. She didn't say a word. She just stared at me, waiting for something, anything, that would make the picture on the screen make sense with the man she had been sitting with in the evenings, the man who had helped her with Ella, the man who had told her he was just a consultant passing through. She set down the mug. She walked around the counter. She sat on the stool next to me, and she said my name, not my real name, the name she knew me as. And she asked if I wanted to tell her about it. I started talking. I told her the whole story, the penthouse, the loneliness, the board meetings, the realization that I had been surrounded by people who saw my wallet and not my face. I told her about my sister, my wife, the casserole dishes I had missed, the years of building a life that didn't feel like anything. I told her about the night in the penthouse when I realized I couldn't name a single person who would miss me. I told her I had come to Silverton to find out if I was anything without the money. I told her I had found something I never expected to find. I told her I loved her. It was the first time I had said it in a way that felt true. She listened to all of it. She didn't interrupt. She didn't look at her phone or glance at the TV or signal that she wanted to leave. She just sat there, and when I was finished, she took a breath. She said she already knew something was off. She said she could tell I was hiding something because people who are honest don't flinch when someone asks about their family. She said she didn't know the specifics, but she knew I wasn't who I said I was, and she had decided to wait until I told her on my own. She said she was glad I finally did. She said she had seen me, the real me, not the fake name and not the money, and she had fallen in love with that person. She said the money didn't change anything. I asked if she meant that. She said she meant every word. I walked down to the hardware store later that day. I found Carl closing up, and I told him the same story. He listened, and he didn't look surprised. He just shook his head and said he had figured out I wasn't from anywhere around there because I drove a truck like a man who had never changed a tire, but he said he liked me anyway. He said the money was between me and my bank account. What mattered was the faucet I fixed and the jokes I told and the fact that I never let him pay for lunch at the diner even when he offered. He said I was a good man, and he didn't need a background check to know that. I went to Lena's house and told her too. She was in the garden pulling weeds, and she laughed when I told her how much I was worth. She said she had a neighbor once who won the lottery, and it ruined him. She said money was like water. It either nourished you or drowned you, and she thought I was learning how to let it nourish. She said she didn't care what I had in the bank. She asked if I had found what I was looking for. I told her I had. I stayed in Silverton. I didn't go back to the penthouse. I didn't go back to the private jet or the board meetings or the life that had been empty and hollow. I kept the yellow house with the peeling paint and the wood stove. I kept the truck. I helped Lena in the garden. I taught Ella how to skip stones across the river. I married Maggie on a Saturday morning in the summer on the bridge that the teenagers used, with Carl as the witness and Lena throwing flower petals and Frank the cook smoking a cigar in the back. I kept my name. Owen Shepherd, the logistics guy, the man who had enough money to live 2 lives. But I only lived one life now. I built a library for the town with my own money because Maggie said the kids needed a place to read that wasn't the back of the diner. I paid for Carl's medical bills when he got sick, and I didn't make a show of it. I bought groceries for families I had never met when winter came, because Lena told me that was what people did for each other in Silverton. I learned that the money was never the problem. The problem was that I had used it to build a wall, and the wall had kept everyone out, including myself. I had been so afraid that people would see the money and stop seeing me that I had never let anyone see me at all. I had been the loneliest rich man in the world, and I had built the loneliness on purpose because it was easier than being vulnerable. I was wrong. The truth was that I could have all the money in the world and it wouldn't matter unless I had someone to share it with. I could have 3 houses and a private jet and a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows, and none of it would mean anything if I was sitting in it alone. I could live 2 lives, but only one of them would ever feel real. And the real one was the one where I fixed the faucet and walked the trail and woke up next to Maggie and Ella in the house with the peeling paint, in the town that had seen me and loved me anyway. I am Owen Shepherd. I have money. I have more than I need, but I am not lonely anymore. And that is the only wealth that has ever mattered. I'll be back with another story next week. Esta resposta 1C, gerada por AI, apenas para referência.